Sex is misunderstood. The confusion about the role of sex in a marriage is so misunderstood universally that it's almost difficult to begin this audio. And have you stick with me because you're going to be highly suspicious. But let's take it from the bottom. Let's take a look at what sex actually is before we pass judgment over it, because the truth is that it doesn't deserve judgment. It's not this evil thing. So let's make that perfectly clear. But let's take a look at what sex is. As we know, sex is the act that typically occurs between two of the same species for the purpose of procreation. And it would be unwise to ignore its purpose because nature is what implanted that purpose in every species as well as humankind. That purpose is for procreation. And if you strip away all of the glamour that has been imposed on sex by the world, by the entertainment industry, by teenage boys, you'll realize that the purpose of sex is very simple. It's to create a fertilized egg in the female so that that egg can grow into a newborn child to be raised in a healthy environment. Yes, it's pleasurable, but that's nature's way of enticing the couple to come together. If it weren't pleasurable, why would they? And so the orgasm, which has become this amazing goal for both men and women, is a simple biological alarm that tells the couple that the egg's fertilized or possibly fertilized. But we don't need you to be coupled anymore. You can go your own separate ways. And this is a reality. This doesn't take away from sex. Doesn't add anything to sex either. This is the simple scientific purpose of sex. Now, I have not had arguments, but I have had people tell me how sex is so important in their marriage. And I agree. Yes, it is. Especially for those who are having a difficult time communicating in any other aspect of their marriage. It's usually the only time that they can communicate and let their walls down and have something that resembles close to an authentic intimacy. So for those, sex is very important because it's the last place where they can have an intimate connection. And you can see that, right? You can see how that makes total sense. But remember, that's biology working because it wants the couple to put everything else aside and focus on the fertilization process. And here's where sex is a two-edged sword. On one hand, it's an amazing tool for creating intimacy as long as you know what intimacy is all about. However, if it becomes the goal of the couple, then everything else in the marriage will fall apart. Literally, the couple will become bored with one another because there is only so much acrobatics. You can do so much stimulation you could create in your imagination. And the act of sex will become a problem for both of you. However, when you use the sex act properly, when you utilize sex instead of letting the sex drive you. When I say the sex drive you, aren't we talking about the drive to procreate, which is just a subordinate drive right under the drive to survive instead of having that drive you? You're using nature now. And now you have spirit and nature dancing together, working in harmony, because when you have sex, you take advantage of this intimate time because it can be intimate. It doesn't have to be mutual self-masturbation. And if you use this time to open your hearts, to raise your energy up to your heart and open up the floodgates of your heart and pour love and distract yourself, your higher self from your genital ear, you will produce a river of love between the two of you. But if you don't do this consciously, then there's this unconscious connection, and it's a trickle compared to the river that it can be. Do you see this? Do you imagine what it is that I'm describing? When you use your free will and you determine what you're going to do and you do it. It's far more powerful than if you just happen to stumble into something. And if you just stumble into it, you may not even recognize what you're stumbling into. And you're so distracted by the body's desire to release its energy that you won't even notice what is happening on the side. Even though what's happening on the side is the most important part in what's happening on the side. If you're totally focused on pleasure, what's happening on the side is you're connecting as human beings at the highest possible level. Of course, another problem comes in, and that is that if you use sex as the only venue, as the only vehicle for expressing intimacy, you're totally missing out. I was talking to a psychologist one day who I was recruiting because in the beginning we recruited only licensed marriage therapists, and this guy had been around for a long time. He seemed like a very nice guy. He was also a religious guy, and he was telling me that he had a great experience of the intimacy with his wife. And I said, you know what? You need to try something else next time you see her, be apart from her. Open your heart to her. Say, honey, I love you from a distance. Let the energy flow and see what happens. And of course, that energy of the heart is 1 billion times more powerful than the tiny little. And this will blow your minds. But the experience of physical sex is tiny compared to the intimacy that you will feel when you open your hearts to each other and intentionally love your spouse. Now, some of you, because I've heard it from many people, mostly men, say, "That's ridiculous." Now, some people have just looked at me saying, "That's ridiculous," but that's because you haven't tried it yet. When you do try it, you'll realize what we're talking about is very powerful. And many men have learned to open their hearts, remove that concentrated effort from their lower extremities, bring it up to their heart, and what they discover is they don't need the orgasm. They don't want the orgasm. It literally gets in the way of this higher experience. Now, does that mean you should never have pleasurable sex, that you should never go to pleasure each other and to play and to be, childlike and fool around and make out? Now, it doesn't mean that at all. You're a human being. You get to do whatever you want. But if the only time you have sex is to have pleasure, you're depriving yourself of the whole experience of marriage. And you're going to regress. You're going to become tired of one another. It's not going to be fun because the human experience, the ego experience, I should say, is limited. It's only when you open your heart and have that soulmate connection that it's limitless. Interestingly, women get this quickly, and there's a reason for this. Women don't have the limitation that men have. It's a very different experience for them. When a man reaches puberty, and sometimes before, all of that energy that nature is imposing on him is telling him he's got a mate, he's got to create, and he's ready. 369 days a year. That was a joke. And he's ready to go anytime, any place. And if not for his mental state and for his higher education and the mitigating factor of his socially responsible attitudes, he wouldn't care who he did it with. The body certainly doesn't care. And the mind tends to follow with the body's promptings. Women, on the other hand, are different. They only feel what a man feels, that drive to procreate. They only feel it a few hours a month when the body's ready. Other than that, a woman's sex drive uses her in different ways. She's manipulated by the sex drive in different ways. And we'll talk about that at a different time. But the woman, because nature has opened up her heart so she can take care of children once they're inside of her, and then for the rest of her life, at least once that happens. So a woman is used to having her heart open. And this is a huge difference between a man and a woman. Men don't walk around with their hearts open like women. So women understand this idea of intimacy. For a man, you say intimacy, it means sex. But for a woman, you say intimacy. And it means intimacy. It means opening the heart and connecting at the heart level. All the stuff around that is very different. So it behooves a man to learn intimacy from a woman. It really does. And when he does, it changes his life because he realizes, wow, I had no idea. And when a woman plays it right, her husband will become, in a positive way, addicted to this love that she's walking around with. And he'll want to be with her all the time. And she will be addicted. If you can say that way, she'll be addicted to his attention because a woman's drive requires her to get that attention from her man. So here's where we scientifically merge the soul and the body and the mind, and we get it all working together. Make it a synergistic experience. But don't be fooled by sex anymore. You use it. Stop being used by sex. Don't be its victim in this. Mostly goes out to men. Don't be its victim. Now, ladies, don't condemn your husband because they're victim of their sex drive. That would be so mean and so wrong. And when you're married to a man, you have to understand he has these needs. He can't just instantly override them or pretend they're not there. And it's your job to not only understand it, but to be part of his experience. But while you're part of this experience, draw him up, raise him to his heart, talk to him, say, honey, I love you. Can you feel me in your heart? Try to feel me in your heart. And if he's not taking a course with you and he doesn't learn these things the same time you're learning, slowly introduce him to this concept and this idea so you don't impose your will on his will. And this is when people understand it. This whole sex thing falls away as a problem. I've worked with some very strong men who didn't know any of this. And once they knew it, because it's reasonable, well, they got it. And once they got it, they tried it. And once they tried it, they realized, wow, this is pretty cool. And it is. So that's it. Enjoy the sex, but keep it under control. Don't let it control you. That's all we're saying. That's what we're saying in this whole thing. Don't be controlled by your body, by your instincts. Be the soul. You control it. The experience of controlling your body and mind changes everything. When you identify yourself as a soul, it changes everything. And you'll be much happier.